Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third part of the Origin Code Academy Prep Course Walkthrough Series. Today, we'll be diving into more CSS, learning about CSS Positioning and CSS Specificity. So if you missed the last two webinars, we have made it through the first four coding exercises, or first four coding challenges, which include HTML elements, HTML attributes, CSS selector, CSS properties, and now we're on to position and specificity. So whether you've already signed up for the prep course or you have never signed up for the prep course, this is a great place to jump in because we're still in the first course, and you could pretty quickly catch up to this point if you just check out the first two webinars. Well, sign up for the prep course, check out the first two webinars, and then you'll be all caught up with the first course. So if anyone has any questions throughout this webinar, go ahead and throw it in the chat section, the chat channel over to the right-hand side of the webinar, and I'll be monitoring that to answer any questions you have about a specific exercise or the prep course in general, Origin Code Academy, how you can get involved. Any questions you got, send them in the chat channel, and I'll be checking that out, and I'll be able to respond to you guys either directly in the webinar, or I'll reach out to you afterwards if it's going to go off on too much of a tangent or take up too much time. So if anyone has any questions before we get started, go ahead and shoot them out now. Otherwise, I'm going to just go over a brief lesson on CSS position, and then I'll review Scrimba one more time for anyone who's never seen it, and then we'll go ahead and dive into some coding exercises. We should be able to get through the rest of the course today if all goes smoothly, and then we'll be on to Node 100, the second course in the prep course modules. So we talked a little bit about CSS before. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and cascading, as in the waterfall nature, the file is read from top to bottom, and your CSS rules are applied accordingly. So rules that are written below other rules will override the rules above them, and so forth. So the written lesson here for CSS positioning, you can obviously read this whole thing yourself more in depth as you get to this point in the curriculum, but just as far as some high-level overview for this lesson, we have positioning. The position property allows you to change how the element should be positioned. And so that's basically like wherever you want to put the heading or paragraph element from your web page, this is how you're going to tell it where to be. And it's going to be very useful. It can also be pretty tricky. Sometimes the elements don't behave as you'd expect, and there's a lot of edge cases and things to look out for when you're positioning elements. So shorthand properties are just, as you can see, instead of typing out 4 lines of code, we can condense it into a single line of code like so, and have the same result. We'll look more into that a little bit later. So not much on positioning in the written lesson. Let's check out the Scrimba video. So Scrimba, for anyone who isn't familiar with this technology, is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen for learning how to code. I mean, back when I learned how, we didn't have this tool, and so we'd have to watch regular screencasts and copy and paste the code into our own editors and that type of thing. And it was just a painful process compared to what we have the ability to do today, which is you can play the screencast as if it were a normal video, and there's a lesson being given in the background and some code being typed out into the editor. However, at any point you can stop this video and edit the code yourself. So instead of saying 0 pixels, I can give it 100 pixels and refresh the page. And now we can see that the actual code is being run in this mini browser right here. So it's a cool way to learn a lesson and test out that lesson immediately right in your browser. So that's a little bit about Scrimba. If we continue the video from where it left off, then the code obviously goes back to the lesson where the instructor left off. However, if you want to see the edits that you made, you can always go over to this arrow over here, look under your Notes tab, and check out our local edits. Okay, so at 45 seconds, we changed the header positioning to be 100 pixels from the top instead of 0. Okay, so there we go. Now I at least have that saved and a way to kind of go back and see the test that I did on my own. All right, so that's a little bit about Scrimba. To learn more about CSS positioning, you can watch this. You can sign up for the prep course and watch the videos and read the lessons yourself. And then for any of you who are stuck in the actual exercises for lesson 6, which is CSS position, then we'll go ahead and go through. Looks like there's 9 exercises. It's a little bit of a lengthier one, but we'll go ahead and go through those now. And if you have any questions as I go through, feel free to let me know. All right, so in our exercise 6, first exercise, let's see. It's asking us to set the border width property of the article rule to 5 pixels. Let's go ahead and go to our HTML tab, hit start, and we have our pre-populated code in our HTML tab. Looks like we have nothing. We have one rule in our CSS tab, and then nothing in our JavaScript tab. So to set the border width property of an element, it is pretty much the same as all the other properties that we've been using in CSS, and this one's just called border width. So we'll give that a border width of 5 pixels. Looks like a border style of solid, and the border color, we'll make that black. So we saw earlier about shorthand properties, and now this is 3 lines of code in our CSS rule that can actually be shortened down to 1 line, like so. If we just take the word solid, place it after 5 pixels, with a space separating them, and then after solid we do another space and paste the color black. Now if we just call that just border, that should give us the same result. However, oh, it did pass the test as well. So just to show you that both ways work, I will undo those changes and back to the long way, and we'll test that again. And it looks like both are still passing the tests, and our border now has a width of 5 pixels. It's solid, and it's the color black. So let's check out some more styles. Another common one for a border is dotted. And let's go ahead and make it blue, just so you can see the difference. So now our tests are not passing. However, you can see the new style of the border is dotted and the color blue, just as it looks here. So another one is dashed. We'll make it red. Another cool one. And then I think we can say double. And it should give us 2 lines here. Let's make that one green. All right, so now nice double border, fancy. It's good stuff. All right, so let's change it back to solid and black so we can pass our tests and then move on to the next coding exercise. All right, lesson 2 out of 9. So it's asking us to set the width property of the article rule to 500 pixels. Let's first hit start, check out our code, and it looks like we already have a rule for the article elements. And so we'll just add a width property of 500 pixels and then a height of 300 pixels. All right, great. So now we can see that our width has gone from taking up the full width of the browser screen to taking up only 500 pixels worth, or about half, it looks like. So, and then it's taken the height from, let's see what it was without the height declaration. It was a little shorter before, and now we've given it a specific height of 300 pixels, and we can see that the height of the element itself has been increased. All right, let's move on to exercise number 3. Set the property background color of the article rule to tomato. So it looks like we're going to be adding on to our article rule and giving it a background color of tomato. And if you missed the last lesson, we went over some of the colors that CSS has built in and recognizes by name. If you just type the first letter, then it'll usually show you some options, like we have tan, teal, thistle, tomato, transparent, and turquoise. So you're limited to a few keywords there. You can also use the hash color or RGB. So for example, the hash color hashtag FFF should be completely white. And 000 should be completely black. So let's test that out. All right, cool. And then we'll just switch it back to tomato in order to satisfy the exit criteria. And there we go. A nice tomato background color. Excuse me. All right. On to number 4. Set the property box sizing of the first article rule to border box. So let's go into our index.html, hit start, and check out. Now we have another rule called first article. And remember, this hashtag is an ID selector. So we can expect that somewhere in our HTML, there's an element with the ID first article. And it looks like it's our very first one here, article with an ID of first article. So now it's asking us to set the box sizing property to border box. Just like so. And you can now see that the setting the element to use border box enforces that everything up to and including the border is restricted to 500 pixels. The default content box sets the content width to 500 pixels, but it ignores the padding and border. So that goes back to our box model lesson. And I'll just pull up an image of the box model here to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So the box model looks like this. Our content is what's actually the text on our page. For example, the content of our H1 would be the actual words blog post 1. The padding is the space around that inside of within the border though. So it's this space between the word blog post and the actual border itself. That is the padding. Then outside of the padding is the border. Obviously here we gave it a border of 5 pixels, solid and black. And then if we were to give it a margin, that would appear outside of the border itself. So just as an example, let's give it a margin of 5 pixels all around. And now we can see that there is some space between the border and the actual edge of the frame here. So starts with content. Just outside of that is padding, border, and then margin. So let's take a look at the difference between border box and content box really quickly. So we gave our blog post 1 the setting of border box. Now, if we try content box, which is the default, we should see that everything inside of the border is being affected by this width. However, when we set it to border box, everything including the border is affected by this width. So now the border itself is squished down to 500 pixels. And whereas before, just the content was forced to be 500 pixels. So it's a subtle difference, but you can see that now the content is a fixed width. However, the border has not had that CSS property applied to it. So let's set it back to border box. And move on to number 5 out of 9. So here it's asking us to set the position property of the element with the ID box to absolute. So if we hit start, we should have a rule selecting our element with the ID box. And now we just need to set the position property to absolute. And let's test that and see what it looks like. So let's run it without setting the position to absolute first. I'll just go ahead and highlight this line and press Command / and this will automatically comment it out for me. Again, that's highlighting or just selecting the line that you want to comment out and pressing Command or Control if you're on a Windows and the / key. And that will comment and uncomment whichever line you have selected with your mouse. So let's comment it out, run the tests again, and we can see that our example box is below our blog post 1 box. And so if we look at the HTML for that, that makes sense because first we have our div, first we have our blog post 1 in our article element, and then below that we have our div example box. And so if we see that the results displayed to the screen, we see our article, which has the border around it, and then our div with example box is below it. This is what you'd normally expect because HTML renders one element right after the other. However, we can modify and manipulate that using CSS, which is what we've done with the position property. And we've told it to be exactly where it would be if there was no other elements on the page. We want it to be in its absolute position, ignoring other elements, going right on top of them, no matter what it looks like. And so if we run that, we can see that it's covering up our blog post 1. Now this is just an example, but so now it looks, the HTML document reads article and div and puts them pretty much in the same spot. It doesn't have a hierarchy, like one doesn't come before the other, it just puts them both in the same spot. That's absolute positioning. And we could say, let's see. Then if we give it the, let's see, not position. If we tell it to be a certain amount of pixels from the top of the page, then, oh, top left 20, okay. So the reason that it has some space between the padding, between the actual outside element and the element itself is this top and the left here. We're telling it to be 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left of where it would actually appear. And so just for demonstration, we will uncomment or comment out these lines and show you that now, actually, let's make these 0. so that we can see these kind of overlapping nicely. Boom, right in the corner there, exactly in the same spot. It doesn't know the difference between where to display these two elements. So we can tell it to, we can actually give it a right, and tell it to be 20 pixels from the right. Let's give that a test. All right. So now it went to the right, or it's to the right of our page, but 10 pixels away from the very far right. And so you obviously can't define a left and a right. So the first rule would overwrite that. So because our left, we're defining our left position first, it reads that one first and it just overrides the right position. But then we can say up, and now we're back to 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left of the page itself. And there's going to be more position options available later on, and we'll probably get to them in a later lesson. If we don't, then I'll make sure that we cover them. Let's go ahead and see what the next lesson. Okay, yeah, so this time we're going to check out the fixed position. So right now it is absolute. Let's check out what the fixed position does. So now if you notice, I can scroll through the rest of the page, but that box never moves. It is fixed to that particular spot on the web page itself. It's always going to be 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left. It's never going to move that spot. So I can scroll up and down, side to side if I had a scroll bar, and it would always appear to be in the same spot. Similarly, we can move that 50 pixels from the top. Actually, let's just go 50 from the left. And now it's going to stay in that same spot. So fixed is pretty easy to understand. It's fixed in that position right on the page. It comes in handy, like if you have a menu or something that you don't want to move, but your content is really long, then you can fix your menu over to the right and have your content scrollable on the left. So let's check that out. Let's move this over 500, which might be too far, but let's give it a shot. Okay, perfect. So now, if this was a menu of some kind, then now we'd be able to read our blog post and still have our menu available right over here. So fixed is a good one. Let's see what we have next. Looks like relative. So whereas absolute refers to its position on the web page itself, relative is going to say how far from where it should have been do you want it to actually display. And so if we change this to relative and test it out, it's going to appear where it would have appeared had we not applied any position property to it. However, it's going to be 20 pixels down from the top of where it would have been, and 20 pixels to the right of where it would have been had we not applied the relative position. So because it appears below the article element, that's where we're going to define its relative position. Relative to the article where it's going to appear, how far do you want it to be from either top, bottom, left, or right? And so let's say if we give it bottom characteristic, and test that guy out, then we can see that it's slightly overlapping the element, the article element. And this is because normally it would have been about down here. However, we told it just to be 20 pixels higher than where it would have been. And so that's relative positioning. relative is meaning relative to where it would have been displayed on the page. And so these position properties always have a corresponding bottom, top, left, or right to tell it where to be positioned on the page. And what else could we do to test it out? Let's see how high we can get this thing. Let's see if we make it 1,000 pixels. Now it brings it 1,000 pixels from where it would have been. 1,000 pixels up from where it would have been. And as opposed to the fixed property, it obviously scrolls away when I scroll the web page instead of remaining there. All right, so now move on to number 8. And this is on to our shorthand rules, which we saw a preview of earlier when we were dealing with the margin, or the border actually. And now we'll just apply it to the padding here. So we see 4 lines of code. Looks like they could be condensed into one single shorthand rule. So I'll do that by just, first I'll get them all in line, separated by a space. And now the order here is important. It always goes top, right, bottom, left. So clockwise, starting from the top for shorthand. And then we don't want to just set our padding top, but our padding in general. So it looks like our padding has remained the same. And just for demonstration purposes, I will go ahead and revert it back. I accidentally skipped on to the next exercise. So here we go. Setting the property border of the article rule to 5 pixels solid and black. And this is actually, we got a little bit of a head start on this one. We did it earlier as an example. So we'll go ahead and just do that same thing. Border, which is the same as writing border width, 5 pixels, border style, solid, and border color to black. So essentially these are saying the same thing. This is just a nice, concise way to say it and get it all onto one line. We'll comment this guy out and just see the results. Our black border here. Actually, if we take out our rule completely, we'll see it without a border. So right now it has no border. Then we'll do it the long way. Looks like we have a border, but our tests are not passing. And so let's just get rid of these guys and shorten it up using the CSS Shorthand property. All right, so now we achieved the same result just in a single line of code as opposed to 3 lines of code. And we're ready to move on. All right, congrats guys. We have finished up the CSS positioning exercises. Great job. We'll move into the last lesson of Web 100. So we're about halfway through the webinar. If anyone has any questions about signing up, about a specific exercise that you're stuck on, coding questions in general, questions about origin. If you want to hear about the Nerf wars that we've been having here, happening on a daily basis at lunchtime, they're pretty exciting. It's also feel pretty safe in my office, and also like I should carry a shield when I walk out the door. But it's been fun. So yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. Throw them in the chat channel, and I will be able to address them. Otherwise, we're just going to move on to CSS Specificity. All right. So let me take a drink here. Hey, Miguel. So I see your question. What kind of program do you have to download to do the exercises? So I will go ahead and throw the link in the chat channel. This is just, you can do this using Chrome, a Chrome browser, or Firefox browser, whichever you prefer. And if you go to this website here that I'm about to put in the chat channel, then you can sign up for this yourself, actually, and start going through the exercises, starting with the introduction. So you don't need anything more than a regular internet browser. I recommend Google Chrome for the best experience. Also, Firefox works well, and the new one called Brave, which is actually by the same guy who invented Firefox, or who created Mozilla Firefox. He also created a new browser called Brave, which I enjoy sometimes, and it should work well in there. But yeah, you just need a browser. Go to that website, sign up, and you'll be well on your way to learn the basics of HTML and CSS, and then diving into JavaScript just after that. So you caught us at a good time, Miguel. We are just at the end of HTML and CSS. In the next webinar next week, we'll be going into JavaScript, so a little more advanced. A week should be enough time to catch up on HTML and CSS, get through all these exercises. You can even view the previous webinars in which we go through all the coding challenges together. And I would recommend doing that, and then joining us next week for some introduction to JavaScript, which is where the real fun begins, in my opinion. I mean, this is all fun. These are kind of the basics, you know what I mean? You want to get into the more advanced stuff, then join us next week. So, great question, by the way, because this is really a good point to make, that how easy this is nowadays, that you have a browser on your phone. It doesn't look so great on the phone, but you have a browser on your tablet. Pretty much always have access to a computer, and as long as you have a browser, you can learn how to code. So thanks again, Miguel, for asking that question. So as far as CSS specificity, it's talking about how we can group selectors together to allow you to be more specific with our CSS rules. And instead of giving everything an ID or a class, then but sometimes this is an easier way of doing that. And looks like rule sets which are more specific will override rules that are less specific. So no matter where they are in the cascading style sheet itself, if it's more specific, it's going to override the less specific rules. And we'll see more how that works when we get to the exercises. So you guys can read through this on your own, more in depth. I'll just hit some of these headlines here to get an idea of what we'll be going over. Inline styles are not too commonly used. It's a better practice to put them all in a style sheet like we've been doing, but it's kind of cool that any HTML element, you can just add an attribute called style and place your CSS rules directly inside of quotes there. So you've seen this before. Color is just a CSS property, and then we define it as red. And it's right inside of our actual list item element. And so it's pretty cool. It's kind of a dirty way of doing things, and it's a way to get something going quickly. But ideally, you'd like to have everything in an external style sheet, which you require or link in using the link element. So then we'll talk about a little bit about the document flow and the float property and clear fixing, which there are some more solutions nowadays for getting around that, but this is a good trick to know. So it's a little bit of an overview. I'll dive into the Scrimba video a little bit, just give a brief overview for anyone who's just joining us now. This Scrimba screencast may look like a typical screencast. However, when I get in here, I can play it, and there's a lesson playing in the background as an instructor types out some code, and you can see the results of his code in the browser right here. You can also move this browser around if it's ever in the way. You can just slide it over here. But then let's say I wanted to pause the video and actually jump in here and add my own CSS rules and kind of see how it works. Then you can just pause the video, jump in, start typing, and boom, you're coding. And so let's say if I give this a color of red and then refresh the browser that we were playing with, and now we can see that our entrees are the color red. And so it's kind of cool. Now I can play the video and it picks back up from where the instructor left off. This is a pretty revolutionary tool, and one that's going to get you up and coding a lot faster than the traditional method of watching, a static screencast on YouTube or something and then having to type the code yourself in another code editor. So really handy tool. Check these out. And then let's move on to the final set of exercises for Web 100, the first course of the Origin Code Academy Prep Course program. So we're on lesson 1 of 8 here. Looks like we had 9 last time. We got through them pretty quickly. Let's see if we can get through these 8 today and finish up the first course. So it's asking us to create a new rule that targets all elements with the blog post title class in the article and sets the color to black without removing the previous rules. So let's hit start, check out our HTML and CSS, and it says asking us to create a new rule. Looks like it's already been created for us in the article. In the article. So without removing this rule, we're going to use a specificity selector. So we want all elements with the class blog post title that are in the article element and set their color to black. So we have our article element, and then we should have some class names of blog post title. Okay. So in order to select that, we will just do article, and then immediately after we'll attach the blog post title class. And so this will select anything. And again, I'll just put this below. This will select any element with the class name of blog post title that's within the article element. And we'll go ahead and set the color to black. And so I forgot the space between the selectors there. So just your first element that you want to select, followed by a space, and then the second element or specificity selector that you want to add. In this case, we wanted to add a class selector. I think so. Let's see, what else do we have? We have an ID of first blog post. That's not going to work. Maybe we'll get into some more specificity selectors in the next lesson. All right. Let's check out our index.html and CSS. Add a new class to the first H1 blog post title called special title. So now we have to modify the HTML a little bit. Add a new class to the first H1 blog post title. So H1 blog post title found right here. And it's asking us to add a class to that. So items can have both an ID and a class. Oh, sorry. It already has a class, and so it's adding us to add another class. And we would just do that by putting a space after the first class and adding the new class name just after. So now this H1 has the class of blog post title and also the class of special title. And there should only be one element with the special title. Looks like we have that That part of the exit criteria is satisfied. Now it's asking us to create a new rule that targets all elements that have both the blog post title and the special title classes and set their color to orange without removing any of the previous rules. So blog post title and special title are two different classes. So let's go blog post title followed by a space and then special title. Make sure I got that right. Special title, blog post title. So very similar to the article rule, except we're just using two class selectors instead of an element and a class selector. So set their color to orange. Test that out. Apparently this one, when you're chaining multiple classes together, you actually don't need the space in between. So we would just chain it like this. First class selector, no space, and then second class selector. And we can see that our first blog post 1 with a special title class has been changed to orange, but not the second one. All right, moving on to lesson 3. So now we're going to create a new rule that targets all blog post title elements within the top post element and sets the color to hot pink without removing the previous rules. So let's hit start and target all of our blog post title elements by using the class selector. And it's asking us to select only the blog post title elements within the top post element. Sorry, the element with the ID top post. And so use our traditional ID selector for top post, followed by the class selector for blog post title. And we're going to set the color to hot pink. And again, since we're not using two class selectors, but this time we're mixing selectors, here we have an ID and then a class selector, they're going to need to be separated by a space in this case. And so now we see that our blog post title within the top post has been changed to hot pink. All right. Moving on. All right, so it's asking us to add the important exclamation point important flag to the blog post color property to override the top post color property. So it looks like we have our blog post is setting the color first to a hex color, and then we're overriding that with the top post and setting this color to green. And so our blog post class looks like it's the whole article, and then our top post, which is just the first article, should be green. Okay, so naturally, cascading style sheets, as we've said before, the bottom rules override the rules above them. However, you can modify that by using this flag called the important flag. Very rarely used in production, I would say. A lot of front-end design guys will complain that this is bad practice and you should not have to use it, but it really comes in handy when you need to overwrite a rule in a hurry. So let's get a preview of what this color is going to look like. Again, you can always just throw the hex value into the browser, and Google will give you a nice a sliding scale of what kind of color we can expect that to be. So now we should see that our first blog post should be actually this color instead of the color green. And now we see that both the blog post both of the blog posts have this color, and our top post rule is completely overridden by the important flag. So again, I'll just take that off and show you again that the top post now becomes green with the important flag. It overrides the green rule. So moving on to lesson 5 out of 8. It's asking us to add an inline style attribute to the top post element that sets the element's color to black. So inline CSS rules also override any rules in the CSS file. So let's take a look at that. We hit start. It's asking us to find the element with the ID top post right here. So it's our article element. And then like we have the ID attribute, class attribute, now we can add the style attribute. Again, it just takes a string as well. And inside of that string, we can actually write our CSS rules just as we would inside of our CSS file. So we can say color colon black. And don't forget the semicolon, which may look weird inside of a string, but you're going to need it. So let's check that out. Looks like our blog post 1 is now black, and it has overridden the blog post rule and the top post rule. Let's check this out. If we place our important flag back on the rules, the important flag will override even inline CSS rules. That's how powerful it is. So if we remove that, now we can see that our inline rules overrode the rules that are in the file. However, they can't beat the important flag. Actually, nothing can beat the important flag. It's like the gun in rock, paper, scissors. It's just not even fair. All right. Looks like we're on exercise 6 of 8 now. Let's check out our HTML and CSS. And what's it asking us to do? Update the article rule margin property to horizontally center the article on the page, leaving the top and bottom margin at 10 pixels. So update the article rule. Looks like we have a rule for our article. Margin property. Horizontally center the article on the page. So another cool shorthand property to CSS, if we just leave the 10 pixels at the first position, it's going to apply to the top and the bottom margins. And then it's asking us, and then the next value would indicate the left and right margins. And so let's try to get an idea of that. So now, let's see, how can I show you? I'm going to place another article. I'm just going to copy and paste this article and run that test. And so now we can see that there's some margin between our two elements. And let's see. So if I take away this second one, we should see that our left and right margins disappear. Oops. Oh, I apologize. If you leave margin 10 pixels, that applies to top, bottom, right, and left. However, next, if we just do 2, the first one will apply to top and bottom, and the second one will apply to left and right. So now we should see our left and right margins disappear. However, our top and bottom ones remain. And similarly, we can make our top and bottom margins disappear and keep our left and right margins of 10 pixels. So now our top and bottom have no margin, but our left and right are back to a margin of 10. So when it asks us to horizontally center the article on the page, leaving the top and bottom margin at 10, we know that we can leave our top and bottom, which is our first position in the shorthand property, to 10, and then the shorthand for centering is auto. It's actually the word auto. So it'll read this, and it should center our elements on the page. So again, when writing shorthand properties for margin, if you just have 2 specified, then the first one will apply to both the top and bottom, and the second one will apply to the left and right. So now if we add a third one, if we remember that it goes clockwise, it's going to pick up the bottom margin now. So let's give that an exaggerated margin of 100 pixels so we can test this out. But since we don't have anything in the fourth slot here, it's still going to apply the second rule to the left and right. And so it's still going to be centered. However, our bottom margin is going to be drastically increased. So now we have a huge margin between our first and second blog post, and our left and right margins are equal, and the item is centered on the page. So that's a little more about shorthand properties and also the auto property, which is very cool. You don't have to worry about centering it and eyeballing it and like getting it close. You just know that the browser will detect the width and place it right in the center for you. So a very cool keyword there called auto. All right, getting towards the end, 7 and 8. It's asking us to update the blog post rule to place the 2 blog posts next to each other by setting the width property to 45% and the float property to left. So set the width property to 45, find the blog post rule first, and set the width to 45%, and float to the left. Let's before we actually run that, let's see what the page looks like first. All right, have a nice few centered elements on the page, a couple of blog posts like we've been dealing with, and then let's see what happens when we add a rule to float to the left. All right, so now we have told our blog posts to be 45% of what their actual width would be. And then we've told it to kind of wrap or float to the left. It's a kind of a cool way to make some columns on the page. And let's see what happens if we float to the right. Now we can see that our blog post 2 is actually comes before our blog post 1. And so we'll just switch that back to left. And that looks a lot better. All right, so it looks like we are on the final exercise for Level 7 of Web 101 HTML and CSS Basics. Feel free to throw any questions that you've got in the chat channel. We're about 5 minutes away from wrapping up this webinar, so If you got any questions, don't hold back, throw them out there. All right, find and add a clearfix class to your CSS. Apply the class to the section elements. All right, so find and add a clearfix class to your CSS. And apply that class to the section elements. So we'll find all of our section elements, given the class of clearfix. Any section elements can be added. Looks like just 2. All right, so it says to make sure to rename the class clearfix even if you find it online by another name like CF. So let's go ahead and look for an example of a clearfix class. All right, so let's grab this guy. Throw them in our CSS. After should have content property. Okay, so it's asking us to add the after property. All right, and now our tests are passing. All right, congratulations, guys. That is the end of Web 100. We are moving on to Node 100 in the next lesson. I'll save our progress for the next time. And in the meantime, you have some time to catch up on Web 100 and go through all of the HTML and CSS basics, master those, go through our first couple webinars, make sure you get an understanding, and then you'll be ready to move on to Node 100, Introduction to Programming with Node.js. JS obviously standing for JavaScript, one of the most popular languages of the web at the moment. You'd be hard-pressed to find a website that does not use JavaScript. Maybe an old-school site. But yeah, nowadays JavaScript is very popular. It's a very fast-changing language, very powerful that you can do quite a lot with. As far as creating web apps, more advanced than just a simple website. It's what we use here and what we teach at Origin, and it's what we believe in. So join us next week for the intro to JavaScript. It's going to be fun. It's going to be informative, and you'll have a chance to dive into some of these Scrimba screencasts. And let's see. All right, yeah, it looks like Adrian will be your instructor for the next section. Our instructor, I apologize. All right, guys, as always, the link is in the chat channel to sign up for the prep course and start going through this work yourself. You can always reach out on origincodeacademy.com if you have any questions about admissions process, anything like that. And hopefully we will see you at the next webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and I'll see you next time.